watching Beyond Markets, where we bring you up to speed on development outcomes on the continent. Welcome, I'm Esther Awuni. On today's show, we'll explore the impact of women on Nigeria's economy. You can join the conversation on social media. Let me know what you think about the topics we discuss. And to do so, use the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can also send a message to my Twitter handle. It's at Esther O. Awuni. Now, a recent report by PwC Nigeria says the country has an almost even balance of the population between men and women, a trend that is almost mirrored in the labor force. However, the trend is skewed towards men when one considers the micro-business space, where women account for 41% of business ownership. Meanwhile, the World Economic Forum says Nigerian women represent 65% of skilled professionals, but account for only 30% of senior corporate leadership positions. Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria, joins me to explore the impact of Nigeria's women on the economy. Andrew, thank you so much. Pleasure to have you on the show today. Quite a comprehensive report, and good to see. I mean, looking at some of the indexes, some of the metrics, and how women are performing across the economy, across sectors. Politics, numbers not so good, but one does see some encouraging numbers, some encouraging statistics. But let's just start with some of the key highlights of the report. Obviously, there are benefits of economic empowerment when we see more women are involved. Walk us through what you would consider as key elements of this report.
Well, to begin with, as you said, opening, the women are in the workforce. More than 50% of women of working age are in the workforce. A little less than 60% of men, so there's not a very big gap there. And there are a lot of women entrepreneurs, so 41% of micro enterprises, or 40%, let's say, of micro enterprises are headed up by women. And women are overrepresented in the service industry as employees on that. So you can see there is this big participation by women in the economy. And even though they're less as a percentage than men in agriculture, they're still present in agriculture, often being the one that are principally involved in it. They're also in manufacturing. So I think there's a lot of positives to take out of this.
Now, I know that, well, like you said, and looking at the report too, many of the numbers are good, but we recently celebrated the International Women's Day, and I remember I had a panel of women here, and not just here, just looking at different interviews, different women speaking about how far the women have come. And of course, the drive to close up the gender gap, one still gets a sense that obviously there's still a lot of work to be done. And just looking at the gender part of the report you put out, assessing the gender gap index, Nigeria still remains within the 100 and 130th position out of 153 countries. And we're not seeing these numbers, we're not seeing them moving, we're not seeing some progress. Could you just shed more light on that?
Well, I think what we found was, as I said, a lot of participation by women in the economy, but in the formal sector, what's happening as people become more senior, you get less and less women. So you have at the entry levels, you've got roughly equal. If you take PwC, for example, our younger staff, our next gen as we call them, I mean, maybe more than half are women. I'm not sure, but we don't have an issue. But then as years progress, and women often have more responsibility for things at home, they have more responsibility for childcare, they have more responsibility for elder care, it becomes harder and harder to sustain that. So what we find in the report is, as you move to the senior levels, that number drops down. So in senior positions at companies, bigger companies in this country, only about 23% are women at that point. And then if you look even beyond to the board of directors, there's been a lot of progress over a few years there, but it's still only 19%. So I think this is a pattern that plays around the world, but there just needs to be more effort to put women across the board at all levels.
Speaking about effort, I remember back to that panel that I said I had here, 3 women across the energy, power, oil and gas sector, and they highlighted for the professional side of things now that they would like to see more mentoring, more mentorships. They would like to see women seeking more professional, bettering themselves, maybe getting better, higher degrees, more professional degrees, just on the professional side, getting more mentorship, as it were. But I'm just wondering, do you think that those are some of the things we need to do to begin to move the needle?
Well, this report, it's interesting because we've done this in 2 parts. So this part came out for International Women's Day. It's really the numbers. So what's the numeric story for women in Nigeria's economy? But it's not enough to just have the numbers. We have another second part of the report coming out where we've interviewed a lot of women that people will know, the famous women, some others in mid-career, and ask them what are some of the challenges so that we can give a more contextual part. And I don't want to give all the story away for that report, but one thing that does come out is women need to support women. And they're sort of saying that sometimes in the workplace, in the professional life, women are not getting enough, as you say, mentorship from other women. They're not getting enough support professionally. So I think that's something that's going to be very critical as we come out with the next piece of this.
You know, when we look at the numbers in developed economies, particularly in Europe, one sees very higher numbers. And I'm just wondering, what are some of those lessons that we can take away from, examples such as that and perhaps apply here to get our numbers up?
Well, I think one of the things that we quote in this study is just from almost obvious that if you have more women in position of leadership, then people will think about sort of a broader range of things, not just necessarily economics or GDP. And of course, we've been talking for maybe the last year now about how critical it is to have sustainable development goals, where we think about the whole country, the whole population of the country. And if we get more women in senior positions, you tend to think about that. So if you look at countries like Sweden or Iceland, where there's a high proportion of women in political life, in business life, you tend to have better kind of human outcomes. So we would like to inject that kind of thinking into there. And women tend to have more concern for relationships, more concern for everyone in the company and everyone in the broader society. So it'll change the nature of the business culture if we get more women involved.
Do you think that we also need to perhaps hear more male voices, more male advocates, to join the table, to join the call for, that gender equality, as it were?
Well, absolutely, and I think one of the things at PwC, we really pride ourselves on the advancement of women in PwC. We've got a tremendous group of women partners that have an increasing percentage of them. But one of the things that we ask at PwC, and I think other progressive companies say, is the men have to step up and also support the women. So we have a specific initiative at PwC that says to men, what are you doing to make sure that women are also getting their fair share of opportunities and are able to advance? So it's not just women supporting women, you have to have men supporting women too.
Well, speaking about support also, what about the private sector as a whole? I mean, the report has highlighted, as we probably already know, that when women work, we see economies, get better. The GDP numbers, there's proof, there's statistics to show that. Do you think that perhaps the private sector business, on its own too, should also do more in that regard? Because if we have the numbers, the statistics already prove it. I know that sometimes it can be hard in government. Government can also support by way of policy, but the private sector has a lot of muscle, and I'm thinking, that could make a lot of difference.
Well, I think the actors in the private sector that are interested in these sorts of issues, so the companies like Dangote or international companies like Nestle, for example, they care about this issue, and you see a lot of progress. So as I go around at PwC to see my clients, you see a lot of women at the bigger companies, both domestic and international, that we deal with. You have women in powerful positions. You have policies that promote inclusion in general. You have a lot of the CSR activities are focused around girls' empowerment, about girls' education. So I think for a lot of the better run companies that happens. I guess the question is that some companies that maybe don't pay enough attention to it and don't have these programs. But I think what that means is we need the bigger companies that think this way to be even more proactive with their voice, with their advancement of women in this area, and make sure that they're showcasing it. So that's why we put this out on International Women's Day, because we want this issue front and center.
But for you who gathers the data, the statistics, do you get a sense that we're growing a better awareness within the private sector of the importance of having more women, especially at a board level? Do you get a sense?
I think it could be better. As I said, in a lot of the banks that I interact with, or as I said, international companies, the top domestic companies that are well run, you have this sense, but it's not throughout the whole not even throughout the whole formal economy. There's still companies that maybe aren't embracing it, and we need to use our voice and others to put this on the agenda.
Okay, let's quickly talk about education, where it all starts, because even at that level, a lot of girls still don't make it to formal education level, and that's where it all starts. If we're going to have women in professional, higher, executive or even on company boards, obviously it starts from starts from early childhood education. I know that Nigeria has done a lot in that regard, but from your study, from your report, what can you tell us as regards education in terms of what the numbers are and perhaps what's improving?
Well, I think, if I remember the report right, there still is a gap, for example, a literacy gap between men and women in Nigeria. There's still a gap in attendance in school in Nigeria between girls and boys. And we all know the official statistics that say we have in Nigeria the most children out of school out of any country, which is very, very worrisome. So, I mean, we have said for at least the past 2 or 3 years that in terms of the investment priorities of the federal government, it should be education, human welfare, education and healthcare. And sometimes, of course, what happens is because those are recurrent expenditures, people seem to think that that's not the right thing. We should be putting in a hard infrastructure. But we need, let's call it both hard and soft infrastructure. And we're not spending enough money in this country on education. And of course, what's happening is the people that want to educate their children are all having to privately pay for it, but it means there's still children that are left behind. And as the numbers in the report show, there's more girls left behind in education than there are boys in this country.
So I'm just wondering, if you think about that and tying it to our sustainable development goals, doesn't that potentially present the danger that we may get there a lot slower than we should?
Well, I guess I think our argument is let's tie everything to the Sustainable Development Goals, because at least we have a language that we can now measure things, right? So one of the problems that happens is we put out a GDP number, we put out kids out of school, we put out a poverty number, healthcare indicators, and it's all a little bit, it's difficult to digest. But the Sustainable Development Goals are very, very clear. One of them is around education. And we can measure that. And so we would like to actually have government orient the statistics so that we're actually measuring sustainable development goals more clearly. And I think that, in fact, there's a goal for education, obviously, but there's also a goal for gender equality, right? And we'd be measuring both of those things. And I think that if we had a common language about the Sustainable Development Goals, I think we'd find more progress. And of course, we've encouraged very openly Nigeria, but particularly Lagos State, to try to be a global leader in using the Sustainable Development Goals as a yardstick. And of course, and in Lagos, we have the special advisor, probably senior special advisor to the Lagos governor, Shalapo Hammond.
Oh, okay.
Who's for Sustainable Development Goals. Okay. So it's a woman. The governor's already, interested in this, and we'd like to see that go further, because that really, when we really highlight the number measured in the proper way, then it's going to get attention.
Absolutely. Andrew, we'll just take a short break at this point. We'll come back and pick up from where we left off. I've been speaking to Andrew Nevin, his partner and Chief Economist at PwC Nigeria, looking at the impact of women on the Nigerian economy. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Beyond Markets. If you're just joining in, Andrew Nevin, partner and Chief Economist at PwC Nigeria, is our guest today. And we have been assessing the impact of Nigerian women on the economy. Thank you, Andrew, for your time so far. We'll get back to the economy, but I'd like us to quickly just talk about the impact of Nigerian women on the political scene here. The numbers are still low, but I'd like you to just help us understand the picture and the scenario that we have at the moment.
Well, in the report, what we showed was at the bottom are owning micro enterprises or entrepreneurs, roughly 50-50 women and men. As you became more senior, there were less women in the senior roles, but still 23% of senior roles in formal big companies are occupied by women, 19% on the board of directors. So not perfect, but still progress. But then when we look at the political sphere, we really see a gap between Nigeria and other places. So the numbers we have, only 6% of senators, for example, are women. As far as I understand, there's no governor that's a woman right now in Nigeria. And yet we look around at other parts of the world and even other parts of Africa where you have places that 30-40% of legislatures are women. And we looked at many countries where women have been the prime minister, or if we look today in Germany, of course, the UK, India's had elected, Canada's had a woman prime minister as well. So that's a real gap, bigger than in the private sector.
But does the report look at what could possibly be the underlying reasons or issues, or challenges why that is so?
Well, this report is part one of, it's a part one of two-part series. This is just looks at the numbers. It doesn't do a lot of interpretations, trying to put out the numeric analytic story for all of us to digest. The second one, we talked to a lot of prominent women and asked them about the situation, and they telling their own voice, you know, what they see as the challenges. And I think when the second part comes out, we're going to get some real insight. And one of the people we interviewed was actually a minister. Former minister, and I think her insights will be very interesting on the political angle.
Well, can I ask you this? What is Nigeria missing out on, not having enough women or a good number of women in politics, you know, taking decisions and running things, as it were?
Well, if you think about what women bring to the table, they bring a more holistic view of an issue. They bring a better understanding of relationships, and I think more emphasis, of course, on children and children's development, not just monetary things. So by having only 6% of senators be women and no governors be women, I think Nigeria is missing out on a lot of the, you know, pro-family, pro-women, pro-development, like health care and education in particular, that women would traditionally support and understand. Do
you think there's perhaps some of that is also could be cultural, maybe cultural issues, traditional issues? You know, the women here in a climate like this has seen through the lenses of, you know, a traditional role of a mother, nurturer, someone who stays at home, takes care of the kids. Obviously has a job, but, you know, still centered around, you know, caregiving within the home, etc. Do you think that maybe that could be a challenge?
Well, I want to be. I mean, I've been in the country for more than a decade, but I want to be careful making sort of cultural judgments about it. But I mean, I think worldwide, it's fair to say that women tend to be more nurturing. They tend to have more family duties in any country that I've lived at. They have obviously childcare duties, which tend to be more than the men contribute, and they also tend to play a disproportionate role in elder care, so caring for, you know, the older generation. And so all of those things create a lot of pressure on women, and it's not just true in Nigeria, it's true, I think, around the world. So of course that's why it's so critical that we pay attention to the role of women and giving them opportunities not just to play those roles, but also to play very senior roles in business, not just senior roles across business, across politics, across NGOs, across all of society.
But is there anything within, you know, the research that you've done that tells you or gives you some kind of hope that at some point, you know, there will be some kind of change, things, you know, will change? I know, well, I mean, those other countries that have higher numbers, they did start from somewhere, but are we on that path yet?
Well, I mean, I find the time I've been here, I mean, certainly PwC, as I said in the first half of the show, that we put a lot of attention on women. Every time I'm in a meeting at PwC, there's lots of senior women that are part of it, that are driving things. When I go to my clients, I'm always working with very senior women. That gives me a lot of encouragement. I know the report says only 19% of board members are women, but still that's big progress. And when I work with boards, I'm always seeing women. A lot of the companies that I work with, the chairperson is a woman, so that gives encouragement to. The question is, and I'll put maybe the listeners or watchers can start a bit of a Twitter conversation about this. But why has there been so much progress in the organized private sector? There's so much entrepreneurs across the country who are female, and yet in the political sphere, Nigeria lags behind. And so if you compared it to some other African countries, I think you would find that women are more advanced in the private sector, they're more advanced entrepreneurially, and yet they're way behind politically compared to some other countries. And that, I think, is something that people...
And it's funny because that is where, I mean, that's fair, political sphere, that is where, you know,
well, that's where policy is made, important decisions.
That's where change
right.
can actually,
so we
take place.
We need women to be more involved in that, and I don't know quite how to do that, but I think young Nigerians can think about that, and I know so many talented young Nigerian women that have a voice and would make fantastic political leaders in this country.
Now, if there's one topic, because I also, while we're celebrating International Women's Day, one other topic that, you know, made center stage was the gender pay gender pay, the gap in gender pay, and you hear stories of women who are doing the same work, same job description, the same amount of hours, energy, and all of that, but then still getting lower pay, and it's just this phenomenon that has just refused to go away or show some progress. But what is your opinion on that? The fact that this continues to happen.
It's not a uniquely Nigerian issue, right?
Yes.
I mean, around the world, every time these surveys are done, I think you get a similar number, somewhere between 70 to 80%. For the same work, a woman generally gets paid 70 to 80%. I'm not sure there's any other strategy than we just keep pushing this. To the extent that larger firms or firms with more organized performance management systems grow in the economy, hopefully they'll be using more objective measures to decide on someone's compensation on that. But that gap has persisted in countries, both developed, richer countries, less developed countries, has persisted, is very high, seems very hard to reduce.
Now looking at, all the numbers and all the statistics here in this report, and just looking at the overall contribution of women and the impact they've had on the economy, I'm just wondering how it all comes together, and what is your final submission in terms of, okay, when one says, what is the impact, how much impact has a Nigerian woman had on the Nigerian economy, or how much impact a Nigerian women having on the Nigerian economy, that we can say that, okay, fine, it's tangible, we can actually see the numbers show that? What would you say?
No, I think overall this is a good news story, apart from the political representation, which we need to work on. But we look both at the micro-entrepreneur level and the SME level, so many women. As I said, we've interviewed a number of them for that. Let me just call out one, I think, fantastic woman who just shows you the impact of it. So this is Amal Hassan, who has Outsource Global, which she started in the north. It's based in, I think, Kaduna and Abuja. It has 1,000 seats, so it employs 1,000 educated Nigerians who do outsourced tasks from the UK and from the US. So she's bringing in foreign exchange into this country, and I think she's just an amazing woman. And I think there are lots of amazing women in this country that have built businesses on their own. I met one, Mo, I met the other day, the CEO of Ebony Life. What an extraordinary story she has. So when we look at these role models out there, I hope they're inspiration, not just for girls, but for boys too. Because, we can be inspired by women. But I think that's very bright. But then I come back to this issue, all this progress, all these incredible accomplishments at all levels of business. How do we translate that in Nigeria, though, also to political representation?
But I'm just thinking that, at that point, would that be a point where the government can step in and say, okay, we're seeing what these women are doing, we're seeing the potential, we're seeing the impact, actually. How about we begin to see how we can scale this up?
Well, but we all know no one gives up power voluntarily, right? So,
Sure.
we're in a somewhat of a messy democracy. I guess the way I would put it is young Nigerians, both men and women, young Nigerians, they're the ones that have to use their political voice to make change, and hopefully part of that change will be more of a gender balance in the future. So when we're out 5, 10, 15 years, we don't have just 6% of senators are women, we have 40% or 60% of senators. That there's the potential to have a woman vice president, there's the potential to have women governors, the potential to have a woman president, if we can imagine that.
So there's potential for, or it's important that this next crop of a generation of women who are coming up perhaps need to be more vocal, as it were. We need to see more women supporting more women. Do you get a sense that, you met a couple of them, but I'm just wondering for the younger female entrepreneurs who are just coming up in business, those who are also coming up within government, do you think that perhaps we should have louder voices? They should be more vocal, as it were, in terms of, like you said, power won't be given voluntarily. Having those voices constantly, heard and loud enough.
Well, I think one thing that will come out in the second part of the report is to make progress on this dimension, women have to support women. Men have to support women too, but women also have to support women. And we'll have a number of the women we interviewed, a little older, who will make the comment that they don't feel that women always support women. So hopefully this younger generation will be more supportive. But we also need younger men. As younger men and younger women get older and become the political power in this country, they need to be together and support each other.
Now, what do you say when you hear a body like the UN or the World Economic Forum say, in the next 190 years, we're never going to see the gender gap close, not in our lifetime, etc. But, of course, advocacy will continue and will continue to do the work. What comes to mind for you?
I think that's pessimistic. I mean, even in my lifetime, there's been such incredible progress in this, both in Canada, where I grew up. As I said, in the decade I've been here, Nigeria, other parts. I lived in China for a decade. You see very strong women in business in China. Yes, there's a gender gap, but I think we've made great progress over 30 years. This pay issue is sticky. We need to address it, but even the fact that we're having this conversation about it shows it's sort of out there in the public domain. So no, I'm optimistic, and I'm particularly optimistic in Nigeria, as I said, because you look at so many women at all levels of business who are doing incredible things. That to me is an unstoppable force.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrew. We'll leave it there. Thank you for talking to us today. Pleasure having you on the show. I've been speaking to Andrew Nevin. He's a partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria, looking at the impact of women on the Nigerian economy. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of the show on our website at cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Market, and of course, you can send your thoughts and your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awoni. From myself and the team, it's bye for now.